Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a recent wrap up. These are going to be just a few books that I've read recently and wanted to talk about, but I don't know if I'm going to have the time to do individual dedicated book reviews. The first book is a gusher. It's a book I'm going to be gushing about, and that would be All the Stars and Teeth. This book is so much fun and probably the most vivid, colorful, elaborate, interesting descriptions that I have come across in a while. So I'm a huge fantasy fan. It's primarily what I read. And one thing that I have a love-hate relationship with when it comes to the fantasy genre are the descriptions, because I find for myself, sometimes if somebody's wearing a pretty standard looking outfit, I'm like, I don't care what they're wearing. Or if there's like pretty standard decorations in the room, I'm like, I don't really care about these things. Do they pertain to what's going on? No? Okay, I don't care. You have to really, they have to matter for me to care that much. I understand placing me in the story, making me feel like I'm there. I understand that. But man, sometimes for me, the descriptions just go on and on and on, and I don't care. But this book, I don't remember the last time that I was so caught up in the descriptions in a story. I know it's a really weird thing to continuously go on about when I haven't even told you the premise for it yet, but I just really wanted to highlight that about the story because I was so consumed by it. I thought the descriptions were always so lush and beautiful and really, really unique. Anyway, getting into what this book is actually about. Amora is the heir to the throne. She's not going to be taking it over immediately, but her birthday comes around. That is the particular birthday where she has to prove that she has control over her magic. Her kingdom is made up of a series of islands, and most of the time on these different islands, people pick a specific form of magic that they're going to learn. For the most part, within each island, you heavily have a specific magic learned. Her family is the only family that can learn soul magic. So you have different magic on each island, but hers is the only one with soul magic. Specifically, her family are the only ones that are allowed to learn it. She has to perform on the day that she is of age to prove that someday she can take over the throne from her parents. Things don't exactly go according to plan, and it kind of thrusts her into this mission. She starts to discover there's more to her kingdom than she realized. She's been kept in the dark about a lot of politics, and a lot of the story takes place on the ocean, and there's sea creatures and sea monsters. I liked our main character a lot. I liked the side characters. She is our main perspective the whole time. You're always with her. You don't get other point of views. But you do have side characters who have, I think, pretty distinct personalities. At some point in the story, every single one of them does something that you're like, whoa, man, you need to say sorry for that. That's not cool. And I really liked that because they called each other on stuff. I also felt like the magic was super cool. So beyond having really vivid, beautiful, lush descriptions, the magic was really interesting. And it kind of played on some familiar magic that we've seen before. Some of the islands, they have healing magic. Some of the islands have elemental magic. We've seen those things before. There's one island that has time magic, but they don't really alter time. They alter how you are within time, so they can like speed up their hands, and they can, as a result, get more work done, or in a fight, they can make their movements a lot faster, but it takes a toll on their bodies. So that was really interesting. And at one point, there's like a crime boss who's almost trading in time. That was really fascinating. And then the soul magic stuff is really bizarre and really interesting. So I liked that they played on something kind of familiar with certain parts of the magic, but then also brought in their own unique twists. It made it so that the magic was always magical. A couple of things that maybe won't be as appealing to some people. I do think that the writing is not necessarily anything that's gonna wow anybody. It's not the most beautiful writing in the world that I've ever come across or anything like that. The descriptions are unique, but I wouldn't say that they're unique because she finds really interesting ways to describe things. I think they're unique because the things she's describing interesting things. So for example, because they have a lot of their customs inspired by the ocean and their magic and things like that. The ways in which they dress, their fashion, those sorts of things, the way their buildings look are all very much inspired by that. I'm pretty sure at one point somebody just straight up had a starfish on their face, but I don't feel like the writing necessarily was it's just so beautiful, and I constantly wanted to tab the book because, oh my gosh, the writing just really hit me. It wasn't really like that. Also, I wouldn't say I was extremely emotionally attached. I cared about our characters. I wanted them to succeed, but I don't know that I was like devastated. Also, the antagonist in this story is one of those sort of distant antagonists that you're not really feeling this strong connection where you're like, oh my gosh, we have to take this person down because I've seen them commit so many atrocities. You just kind of, you know that they're doing stuff that eventually our characters are going to have to deal with. That definitely made the pacing toward the end interesting, because I got to a certain point in the book and I'm like, oh yeah, that's like a really good ending. And then I'm like, wait, it's not over yet though. Overall, if you are looking for a good ocean-themed story with sea creatures and mermaids and things like that, and you're looking for a good time, a quick read, vivid descriptions, that's exactly what you're going to get with this. Next up, we have The Kingdom of Back by Marie Lu. I mentioned with the other story, All the Stars and Teeth, it's not really the kind of book that I'm going to want to go through and tab up a bunch because it just isn't that kind of a story. This book, completely different. I wanted to tab this constantly. It follows, I'm going to say Mozart's sister, even though Mozart's sister is technically Mozart because that's their last name, but I just feel like that's the easier way to think of it. It follows Mozart's sister. She was a real person in history. Some of you may know I majored in music. I knew she existed. I knew she was known for potentially being just as talented as her brother, but she wasn't really ever recognized in her time, and then she's been kind of forgotten. A lot of people don't even know that he had a sister. When I first heard about this book, I actually was a little nervous. I definitely had intentions of picking it up eventually, but I was not sure I was going to like it. There's a couple reasons for this. One, this book is magical realism. So it's historical fiction. You're following Mozart and his sister, the main perspective being his sister. You're following the two of them in what was an awful childhood, and then in a very bizarre, interesting way, as a child's imagination is wont to do, we see our character kind of coping by creating a make-believe world called the Kingdom of Back. And so part of the story is her and her brother exploring this world. I did not think that sounded up my alley at all. I was like, man, I don't know. I don't really like magical realism. It usually doesn't work for me. The other reason I wasn't sure if I was going to be into it is because I'm familiar with music and I actually have very high expectations, and I can be quite picky when it comes to how music is portrayed in a story. I find sometimes it's almost a little too dramatic for my taste as somebody who has an intimate relationship with music, and obviously I pursued it as a career. I went to school for it. I was like, oh man, I hope that it's done well. Oh my gosh, I loved this book. I adored it. Obviously, everybody should be aware that books are subjective and that people have differing opinions, and thus you can't get upset when people don't like the same thing you like. But man, I am like, how does anybody not think that this is good? Even if it's not your cup of tea, you have to admit it's so great. It's one of those books that it's hard not to get upset at the idea that some people don't like it. If you do not like magical realism at all, if you're like, I want either it to be fantasy or I want it to be historical fiction, you're probably not going to like this book. The reason that it didn't end up bothering me is because their childhood was so unlike a normal child's childhood. From the outside looking in, it looked spectacular, it looked glamorous, and it wasn't at all. From a very, very early age, the two children are basically forced into, well, the daughter is learning music, and then her brother is very inspired by her, and he wants to learn music too, and he just thinks the best of her, and they both are child prodigies. They love it, and they love composing music, although composing music is not something proper for young ladies, and performing past the age of 18 is not proper for young ladies. And so basically our main character has a shelf life, and her dad knows it. He knows that his daughter only has so much worth while she's a child, and then after that it's like, well, now I gotta marry her off. So the only worth that she has in her father's eyes is based on him being able to get them recognized by the world as children. Her brother, he'll be able to go on and pursue music, and she won't. So she, from a very early age, is starting to recognize this really toxic thing. And so it puts this immense amount of pressure on her, and her father is constantly making them travel all around Europe. The kids are always getting sick, which I remember hearing about in my music history classes in college, that they were sick all the time. Their life is practicing, performing, getting sick. That's their lives. And so the two of them develop this very, very close bond but also because their life is so abnormal and not typical for a child, they really did invent their own magical world. That's something I didn't know, but when reading this book, I started to look into it, and it's true that they created their own magical world. The way that she parallels what's going on in our main character's actual life in reality, and the way that she parallels that with this magical kingdom. And as she's growing older, the way things in the kingdom are changing, a reflection of growing up, a reflection of recognizing your place in society in that time. Oh man, it hit so hard. I almost cried pretty much the entire book. One last thing I'll say about this book, in case you're wondering, it's not super music centered, despite the subject matter. It's not a book that you have to have knowledge of music to enjoy. In case you're wondering, me having majored in music, it's not like I had an advantage reading this book because I know what an arpeggio is. It wasn't anything like that. You don't have to have ever taken a music class to enjoy this book. The last book for these mini reviews is going to be Heart of Flames by Nikki Pao Preto. This is the sequel to Crown of Feathers, but even if you haven't read Crown of Feathers, no big deal. I'm not going to be getting into specifics and spoiling anything. A little setup for the first book, we follow a girl named Veronica and her sister Val. Her sister Val is extremely controlling, and honestly, she's almost villainous in the way that she is constantly trying to control everything that Veronica is doing. And Veronica finally has this spark in her where she's like, I'm done with this. Val basically raised her, so she has this really complicated relationship with her sibling, but she knows that she cannot keep going on like this, so she abandons her sister and goes to just live her life on her own, and she ends up joining this rebel group of Phoenix Riders. If you like mythological creatures and animal companions, this is absolutely the book for you, because the animal companion type relationships are so cute and fun to explore. And also, the Phoenixes are just awesome. So you've got like this cute cuddly vibe, but also really cool. Like if dragons, whenever you get a dragon in a book, but it's sweet and you love it a lot, that's what these Phoenixes are like. So the Phoenix Riders, this group, their goal is to try and eventually make it so that this group of people that have animal magic, they're known as animages, they are often taken as slaves and used in the enemy group. They're trying to gain rights back for animages and just try and have more equality all around. She joins this group. She happens to have to disguise herself as a boy when she does this, not because they're like, girls suck. It's nothing like that. It's a little bit more complex of a reason. But either way, she's in disguise. She's trying to have her independence. She's trying to do the right thing. She's trying to join this good cause. The animal magic is really cool. I so enjoyed the first book. I also feel like it's a great book if you are somebody who likes both young adult and adult fantasy, because there's so much lore within this world. There's a lot of extra snippets between chapters, and you're getting a lot of the history between the different sisters who used to rule the kingdom, not the two main sisters, Veronica and Val. You're hearing about these two sisters in the past. They're kind of the reason things are broken apart, and so you're getting bits and pieces of that. You start to see how it's actually interwoven into the main plot. It's really cool. There's a lot of politics. There's a lot, I wouldn't say scheming, but there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes that end up playing a role later. It's one of those books that if you went back and reread it, you would probably see so many more things than you do the first time. I do think that the sequel had a few things to it that I actually enjoyed even more. There are some elements to the second that I think perhaps won't be as appealing to certain readers. So the first one is much shorter, that's one thing. The second one's a lot longer, and I was definitely excited about that. We spent so much time really getting to know our characters and being in their minds, but for some people that can be very aggravating because it does make the pace just a little bit slower. I personally liked our characters, so I was always okay just sitting and thinking with them, pondering morality and love and this crazy sibling bond that our main character has. She's constantly thinking, do I hate this person or do I love this person? Is there still hope for this person? Is this me? Am I the one that's the problem? If you like complex familial relationships, that second one, oh man. However, we're looking at a 600 plus page book, and the first 400-ish pages is a decent amount of setup. It's a lot of reflecting on things, on relationships, and I do think it can be maybe a little slower for people, but I was so for it. I really liked it, and then it made those last 200 pages fly by. If you like a good slow start with a crazy fast ending, that's what this was. I did not want to put the book down. I was always into it, but it was something that I could pick up, read for a while, and then put back, and I definitely wanted to come back to it. But when we got to the last 200 or so pages, I just didn't want to put down. I just wanted to race to the finish line to see what was going to happen. In the first one, I think that we got maybe a little bit more of the animal magic, the relationship with these phoenixes. I think we saw a lot more of that in the first one, and in the second one, I think some of the relationships between the humans were explored a lot more, which I was okay with. I think that some people, if you really like that element of the first book, you might miss it slightly in the second. It's not that it's completely absent by any means, it's definitely still there, but I just think maybe the animal magic kind of took a back seat, and we had a different kind of magic that was more at the forefront. Our main character is kind of trying to overcome the cons to certain elements of the magic while still trying to play an important role in this in the things that are transpiring. One thing though that I felt was not necessarily completely removed from the first book, but just wasn't really a focal point, was the presence of an antagonist, a really good antagonist. I don't know that we really had that in the first one. It was a lot of discovery, gaining independence for our main character, and her trying to be a part of something bigger while also learning about magic and things like that. Where the second one, oh man, the antagonist-like figure in the second one is probably one of my favorite antagonists now, especially because the lines are kind of blurred. There's definitely, I think, traits in the second one of the character just being terrible, but then you see glimpses of them being a person. I just feel like that back and forth of like, oh, maybe they deserve a second chance. Maybe they're not so bad after all. And I'm like, no, never mind, they're terrible. There's a lot of that with the villain in the second one. And it's part of why I think maybe some of the animal magic elements weren't as strong in this one, but a good villain's a good villain. The last thing I want to touch on is the relationships themselves in the second one, and the fact that I always say I don't need a romance in my fantasy stories. If there is one, I just don't want it to take over the plot necessarily. I'm fine spending time developing relationships, whether they're friendships, family relationships, or romantic relationships. I like taking the time to build those, so long as it's not like the plot goes out the window and then we just focus on that for a long time. And in the second one, I definitely think that the amount of romance was right where I like it, because I think it's kind of a slow burn, because the fact that you really don't see a lot in the first one of romance, and the second one's got it, but it's still developing, and I feel like it's the tension between the characters is kind of increasing, and the relationship between them is growing stronger. And what I really loved about it is that it was so sweet. It was sweet and it was healthy, and the characters behaved like people. Sometimes they were selfish, sometimes they were immature, and when they would do that and they would react in a certain way that was negative to the person they cared about, they would have to stop and be like, hey, I'm really sorry. That was a terrible way for me to behave. And I loved it. And I kept telling my husband, I love these two. When are they gonna smooch? Like, I just kept telling him, like, man, I want them to be together. It was slow burn, done so well, with just cute. It was so cute. It wasn't angsty in my opinion. It wasn't really unhealthy and weird, aggressive or anything. It was lovely. I was rooting for it. It was the kind of romance I like to see. Anyway, that's it for my mini reviews. Let me know if you've read any of these books. If you haven't, let me know if you're now interested in them or if they don't sound like your thing at all. But anyway, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys later.